It was the end of a single same-sex marriage that caused so much anxiety for thousands. For months, gay and lesbian couples who came to Canada for their weddings couldn't be sure their unions were legal. We've been telling you today as our top story, the federal government is moving today to end that uncertainty by clarifying the law. We want to talk about it now with Andrew Feldstein, who's a family law lawyer. You remember we first spoke with him when this story broke a month ago. He talked about his concerns then, but he's back on this day via Skype from Collingwood, Ontario. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
What we're hearing from the government is it's going to move today to close the loophole. What do you expect to see them do in legal terms today?
Well, I expect them to make an exception to permit same-sex couples to obtain a divorce in Canada and giving them an exemption that would allow them to apply for a divorce whether they've lived in Canada for the past year or not.
So they need a particular exemption?
Yes. Currently, if you wish to apply for a divorce, you have to reside in a province in Canada for the last 12 months. And what I thought was the strongest argument that the federal government had was to say these people who were married in Canada and lived in the United States had an issue because they weren't resident in a Canadian province for the past 12 months. So they need to provide them with an exemption that would permit them to obtain a divorce in Canada. And I don't believe they'd want to open up the floodgates and allow everybody to obtain a divorce in Canada.
Complicated with that residency requirement, whether it's a same-sex or heterosexual marriage. So is that when at the time this happened, all of the controversy that erupted, the Justice Minister Rob Nicholson said this, the status, a marriage, this status cannot legally be dissolved, but we will search for solutions. So by having this kind of an exemption, has he been able to find that balance?
Well, this would allow them to get divorced in Canada. The argument that created all the controversy was a suggestion that the marriage was void because it wasn't recognized in the domestic jurisdiction that the people who got married were residing in. I don't believe that the government of Canada really needs to even address that issue because whether that jurisdiction recognizes the marriage or not, this is the jurisdiction they were married in, and if they're granted a divorce here, it's irrespective of whether they recognize it in their home jurisdiction or not.
That's interesting because your colleagues in family law, particularly the lawyer who represents the lesbian partners at the center of this case, they have said that not only do they want this exemption or something to be put in place to make it right, close the loophole, but they want the government to go further, to state its intentions very closely. Here's the quote. They should make a public statement in which they clarify that these Canadian marriages are still valid and legal. Do you want to see the government go that far today?
Well, I think if they're going to recognize the divorce, whether they go that far or not, if they're permitting a divorce, they're recognizing the marriage. As I said when I spoke on your show about a month ago, I thought it was an immoral argument. I thought it was a legally weak argument. There's several reasons why I don't believe it was a good argument to make, and it should have never been raised.
Do you think this will put it to rest once and for all then, today's?
Well, I think if they permit divorces of same-sex couples who were married in Canada to take place in Canada, then I think they've closed the loophole. And if they've closed the loophole, most likely that should be the end of the discussion. This is something that, in my opinion, should have never happened and should have been dealt with at the time the legislation was made to permit divorces in Canada as well.
It may end the discussion, but I'm wondering if it ends the ramifications. A lot of bad PR for Canada internationally after this came to public attention. You think that's going to be an ongoing issue?
I would hope not. I tend to think what they're doing right now is providing they take the step that they say they're going to take. I think they're making the right decision. They're allowing people that were married to get divorced. They're recognizing them in the same fashion they would a heterosexual couple, and that's taking the right steps. There obviously were some missteps by the Justice Ministry at the time they made the arguments in court, and since then they've corrected it.
Mr. Feldstein, we'll see exactly what the government says later on today, we expect. But ahead of that, I thank you for your time again this morning.